Colleagues, friends, we've had an exciting start to this campaign. For me, here in the West Midlands, I've been to a steel factory outside Kidderminster, a chocolate factory in Tenbury. I've had a free haircut. I made a Balti in Birmingham. And, the internet, because I'm the underdog, the internet has been kind to me for the first time in my life. And they're running a campaign to help me find the slogan that I should be putting to the country and to the membership. And we've had hashtag take a punt on Hunt, hashtag Jezzas the Bezza, and hashtag Hunty McHuntface. Now be very, very careful how you say that one, because we are the party of family values. Friends, we are in a very serious situation. Get things wrong, and there will be no Conservative government, maybe even no Conservative party. Get things right, and we can deliver Brexit, unite the party, and send Corbyn packing. And that's our choice. But in this Brexit debate, we've had a lot of discussion about how we Brexit, but not enough discussion about who. Who is the Prime Minister we trust to send to Brussels and lead us out of this crisis? And we send the wrong person. Catastrophe awaits. If you choose me, I'll be the first Prime Minister who's been an entrepreneur by background. How many people here have set up their own business? Put up your hand if you set up. That's the Conservative family. Lots and lots of hands going up. And what is it that we entrepreneurs do? We negotiate. If we send the wrong person, there's going to be no negotiation, no trust, no deal. And if Parliament stops that, maybe no Brexit. Send the right person, and there's a deal to be done. Send that right person, and we can do what we all need to do, which is to come back with something positive for our country. And that's what I want to do. And when we do that, what incredible opportunities await this fantastic country. Someone who set up on their own. I am champing at the bit to turn our economy into the most pro-business, pro-enterprise, fastest growing, most high-tech, greenest economy in Europe. That's what I did. I want other young people to be able to do exactly the same thing I did. And we have the best universities in Europe. We've got more tech entrepreneurs, more medicines being developed. We could be the world's next Silicon Valley. And that could happen right here in the West Midlands, because you've got the 5G pilot happening in Birmingham. You've got driverless cars happening at Warwick Manufacturing Group. You've got so many gaming companies in Leamington Spa. It's been rechristened Silicon Spa, not the kind of spa that you take your wife to after you've got her nationality wrong, mind you. But there is this potential, incredible potential. And I'm going to take a giant step to making that happen by a radical cut in corporation tax to 12.5% Irish levels to turbocharge the British economy. I want to land an economic... I want to land an economic jumbo jet on Europe's doorstep so that when it comes to those trade talks, they need us every bit as much as we need them. Now, I'm also the Foreign Secretary who wants Britain to walk tall in the world. My dad was in the Navy. We followed him around from Plymouth to Portsmouth to Surrey to Scotland, which is why, by the way, I'm passionate about our union. Thanks to his generation, we won the Cold War. And the risks out there are increasing, which is why I've said I will increase defence spending to beyond 2% of GDP on top of the 0.7% aid commitment. And I've said I'll do that, not just because of increasing aggression from countries like Russia, because at the point of Brexit, I want the world to know that Britain, the country, one of the very few countries that has championed democratic values and the security necessary to underpin it. I want the world to know that Britain is here, Britain's back, Britain's voice is strong in the world, and we will defend our values. Now, I'd also be the first Prime Minister who's run our NHS. And you have some fabulous hospitals here in Birmingham, UHB, Birmingham Women and Children's. But you also have mid-staffs, or had mid-staffs. And I'll never forget my first month as Health Secretary. The Department of Health advised me not to meet the mid-staffs' families. I rejected that advice. And I met a lady called Julie Bailey. She lost her mum in a horrible, horrible death. She looked me in the eye. She said, "Jeremy, you could change all this." And I hope I did, because by the time I finished, nearly 3 million more patients were using good or outstanding hospitals compared to the time I started. And you know, we Conservatives, we can't just have an economic mission. We must have a social mission. And I want our next social mission to be the social care system for every single older person so that they can live in dignity. And I want it to be the education system so that no one leaves education not able to read or write, not with a rigorous qualification so they can get a decently paid job. I want us to be the first government, a Conservative government that abolishes illiteracy in our society and shows the world our Conservative values. And finally, politics is about winning elections. And I'll be the first Prime Minister in half a century to have won a marginal seat. I know what it's like to knock on every door, need every single vote. I'm looking at every single vote right now. I love you all. And there are some very, very important marginal seats in the West Midlands: Stoke North, Halesowen, Stourbridge, Walsall North. Brilliant MPs. And we've got to be there for them. But I promise you two things as a campaigner. Firstly, when we go back to the British people, we will get more young people voting Conservative, because we can't be the party of aspiration if the most aspirational people in our country aren't supporting us, and we're going to get them back. And the second thing I promise you is I will never provoke a general election before we've left the European Union. I won't do it. The lesson of Peterborough is that that would kill us. Ignore that, and we ignore the crocodile lurking under the surface of British politics. A Labour Party led by the most ruthless, dangerous, anti-Western, anti-British, hard-left cabal there's ever been under Jeremy Corbyn. Now, faced with a hard-left populist, we could choose our own populist. Or we could do better. We could choose our own Jeremy. A Jeremy who is going to deliver Brexit, unleash the potential of our extraordinary country, deliver true social justice. Not so much for those of us in this hall. Most of us have done okay. But for people watching at home, young people desperate to get a decently paid job, families struggling to afford a home, older people who just want to live out their days with dignity and respect. We have to be there for them. That is our Conservative Party. Let me show you how. Thank you.
Hello.
Good.
Let me ask you one or two of the same questions I asked Boris Johnson, possibly not from the first few minutes, but You become Prime Minister, you go to see the Queen, you do your Where There Is Discord, May We Bring Harmony moment on the steps of Downing Street. You walk through that door. What's the first thing that you turn your attention to? What has been the one issue that's driven you that you really want to get solved?
Well, the first issue that we have to do for this country before we do anything else is to solve the Brexit crisis. And it's very important as Prime Minister that you only make promises, whether before you become Prime Minister or when you've become Prime Minister, that you're actually going to keep. And one of the reasons that we failed to get a deal that could get through the House of Commons is because the EU stopped believing that the British government could deliver the British Parliament. So let me answer that question. The first thing I would do would be to put together a Brexit negotiating team that would include, for example, the DUP, the ERG, the Brexit purists in our party, Scots Tories, Welsh Tories, One Nation Tories, a team of people so that the EU knew that whatever we were proposing, we could deliver through Parliament. Basic first rule of negotiation.
But there's something that doesn't add up there, isn't there? Because if you only include Conservatives in your negotiating team...
DUP.
Well,
DUP.
OK, and the DUP.
Well, that
but
gives
if
us a majority.
if you're not including other parties, how can you be sure it'll get through? Because, as we all know, there are plenty of Conservatives who will be determined not to support anything that you negotiate.
Well, that's not my reading of the Conservative Party. I think that there are plenty of Conservatives who would consider bringing down the government if they thought we were deliberately going for a no-deal Brexit. But they want to deliver on the democratic outcome of the referendum, which is an absolute democratic necessity for our country right now. We need to recreate that Conservative DUP family that can get us a majority in the House of Commons. That is the only way. We've tried it with Labour, it didn't work. We've got to do it this way.
But even with the DUP, and depending on how this by-election goes in Brecon, you could be down to a majority of just 2 or 3. Even with them, you can't be sure that you can get it through the Commons. Surely you need to reach out, which is what some people wanted to do back in 2016, reach out to the other parties, bring them involved then, but Theresa May refused to do that.
Well, I don't think that's the right strategy. I don't think it would work. I think Labour has only one objective, which is to provoke a general election and put Corbyn in Downing Street. And by the way, if Corbyn gets into Downing Street, there will never be Brexit. That man will never be allowed by his party to deliver Brexit. And that is why it is so important that we hold together as a Conservative DUP family and get on and deliver Brexit.
Second on that, because of course, before he became leader of the Labour Party, he had a Eurosceptic voting record as good as John Redwood's. You didn't.
Well, let's look at his record since he's been leader of the Labour Party. At every stage, when he's had choices that could deliver Brexit, he has chosen the opposite. At every stage, when I could deliver Brexit, I have voted for Brexit. That's the difference between the two of us.
Isn't part of your problem, though, that of your 6 public backers, of your public backers in Parliament, only 6 voted to leave? Now, you've got Liam Fox and Penny Mordaunt on board, so Brexiteers can be reassured by that. But all of the other public supporters voted Remain. You voted Remain yourself in June 2016, but you have flip-flopped on this subject, haven't you?
I have not. I think it's a matter of public record that I voted and campaigned to remain in the European Union. But like millions of Remainers, I want to get on and deliver Brexit. I think we can make a huge success of it. I think the economy has performed far, far better post the votes than people were predicting. And we can make this work terrifically well. But if we carry on 3 years after that referendum and labelling people as Remainer, Remainer, Brexiteer, we're not going to unite our party. And we're not going to get this vote through the House of Commons. We've got to come together and deliver Brexit.
But there will be plenty of people in this audience who voted leave. Why should they support someone who didn't vote leave and just doesn't feel it in your gut the same way that they do?
Oh, yes, I do. Look at my record. Look at my record since that referendum. I have been very clear on every occasion that we needed to fight hard to get the best possible deal from the European Union, and I have voted for Brexit, like my Remainer colleagues. I say Remainer, we're not Remainers. We're Democrats who want to deliver Brexit. That's what we are. And I have to say that this language is so destructive because we're going to need a coalition inside the Conservative Party. Everyone from Dominic Grieve and Ken Clarke to Jacob Rees-Mogg and Steve Baker. We're going to need every single one of those Conservative friends and colleagues to vote with us to get out of the European Union if we're going to deliver on that democratic result. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to have a Prime Minister who binds everyone together so that we can do our historic mission.
But just after the referendum, you wrote an article for The Telegraph where you said the UK should negotiate a Norway Plus option with Brussels, which would see full access to the single market with what you called a sensible compromise on free movement. Look, so are you open to free movement?
No, I wrote that 1 week, I think less than 7 days after the referendum result. So I think, people were still absorbing the result. But since what I actually said in that article was that we needed democratic endorsement of the shape of Brexit we have. And we've had that. We had a general election in which more than 80% of the country voted for parties that wanted to leave the single market and indeed at that stage leave the customs union, because that was Labour's policy at that stage. So we know what the country wants. We need to get on and deliver it, and we need a Prime Minister who has a plan that can actually bring the party together, negotiate a better deal with the European Union, get it through Parliament, get out and make a success of our country.
This is where I don't understand, because you've only got till the 31st of October. Boris Johnson has committed that we will be out on the 31st of October, come what may. You haven't done that. But how do you negotiate when the whole of the European Commission is away for the whole of August? You don't have a new Commission sworn in until the 1st of November. You've got the European Summit on the 17th of October. You've got a 6-week window there. And then, even if you do come to some sort of deal, you've got to then get it through Parliament. And we know that the European Commission has said they are not going to open the withdrawal agreement.
A wise Prime Minister makes choices on the basis of the options that are actually available in front of them at the time. Now, we don't know what the situation will be on the 31st of October, but if there is no prospect of a better deal, if the European Union have been as inflexible as you say, and if no deal is on the table, then I will leave without a deal, because we must keep our promise to the British people. But I would do so with a heavy heart because of the risks to businesses up and down the country and the risks to the Union. But if we have to in the end, I would do that. But the reason that I haven't made the pledge that Boris has made is because I think it's very important that Prime Ministers keep their word. It is entirely possible that Parliament will rule out no deal between now and October the 31st, or indeed, as you were just talking about to Boris, that members of our own party say I was having a sneaky listen from behind the wings, but, members of our own party have said they might vote against the government in that situation. Now, if that happened and Parliament blocks no deal, and remember, they did this in March, the only way to overcome that would be to have a general election and change Parliament. And that would be a profound mistake, because it would let Corbyn right in. There'd be no Brexit at all. So we must only promise what we can deliver. I want to get out as soon as possible, and I believe that I have the negotiating skills to give us a better chance of getting a deal that can actually get through Parliament.
So if we did leave with no deal, which you admit is a possibility, what will you do to plan for it? Because you're in the Cabinet, as I understand it, no deal preparations have effectively been wound down over the last few months, when in most people's opinion they should have been wound up.
Well, they are in a better state than they were 6 months ago, and I think a lot of work has actually been done. But I think the one thing that I would do that is different to the approach that's been taken by Theresa May and Philip Hammond, I mentioned in my speech that I want to turbocharge our economy by cutting corporation tax to Irish levels, 12.5%, one of the very lowest in the world. That would also be the very best insulation against no deal, because it would turbocharge our businesses, it would give them more cash flow to deal with, and I think we should get on and do these things right away and show the world that post-Brexit, whatever our Brexit deal, this is going to be the most pro-business, pro-enterprise, pro-growth economy in the world.
But when you say that and you go and have meetings with Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel, they'll say, see, we told you so. You just want a Singapore-style economy off the coast of Europe. You're not going to want to have the kind of tough regulations that we have. That's what they accused us of right from the beginning.
Well, if you're talking about Singaporean commitment to infrastructure and fibre to the home and you know, the airports they have, all those kinds of things, if you're talking about Singaporean entrepreneurialism and dynamism, yes, please. But if you're talking about the social model, you know, I was the guy who ran the NHS or was responsible for the NHS for nearly 6 years. That is part of the social contract in this country, and that's not going to change.
Well, we'll come on to the NHS in just a moment. Will you declare a climate emergency?
Well, these labels, frankly, aren't the most important thing. I think there is an emergency in the sense that if we don't take action now, by the time we get to 2050, it's going to be too late. But what people who care about the climate want to see is action. And what we can be proud of as a Conservative government is that we have gone further and faster than any other major economy. We've seen I think since 1990, we've seen our GDP go up by 70% and our emissions go down by 40%. It's a pretty extraordinary record. But that's not the question. It's not whether we've done something. It's whether we've done enough. And the answer, truthfully, is that we haven't done enough. We've lost, nearly half the world's coral. If temperatures go up by another half a degree, we'll lose 80%. If they go up by another degree, we'll lose all the coral in the world. Now, that is just one example of the kind of phenomenon that we're facing. But when I talk to my young kids, you know, I want them to see the Great Barrier Reef one day. I want them to see the wonders of nature, and I want them to be safe in the knowledge that this generation did what it took to make sure that we were responsible custodians.
When you have Michael Gove and Andrea Leadsom, who are both considered to the right of you, when they both say that they would do that, is that not something that you ought to think about? That would demonstrate a commitment to tackling the issue. Would you have a completely separate department for climate change issues, for example?
Well, I think, you know, gestures are very important. Let me tell you what I've done as Foreign Secretary. I've campaigned for the UK to host the next big climate change conference. It's called COP26. It'll be the end of next year.
More emissions by flying into London in their private jets.
Yes, that's certainly true. But as a result of the Paris climate change deal 5 years ago, there has been a very big reduction in emissions and an increase in people's commitments. So I've been championing the UK holding that. We had a big breakthrough last week when Italy, which is one of our competitors, agreed to come in behind us and support a UK presidency. So I think there's something that all government departments can do, and I'm doing my bit.
When you were Culture Secretary back at the beginning of the coalition government, you were responsible for this decision to put the free TV licences for the over 75s onto the BBC. What's your view about what should be done now? Because there's been a lot of anger throughout the country about what the BBC have done, but you effectively made it their decision.
Well, I gave the BBC a licence fee settlement. By the way, that was a deal that I negotiated in less than 24 hours, that BBC licence fee settlement, and I'm not promising to do that with Brexit. I think it may take a little bit longer than that. And I gave them enough money in that settlement to fund free TV licences for the over 75s. In subsequent settlements, they've decided that they don't have enough money to do that. And my concern about that is that we promised in our manifesto to protect pensioner benefits. And if over 75s lose that benefit, they would feel that's a breach of our commitments. So I'd honour that commitment.
But why should the BBC be responsible for welfare policy?
Well, the BBC signed up to that deal, and you know, that was a deal with government. But I think what we have to do is be honest and truthful about our manifesto commitments.
Now, you've spoken quite often in the leadership campaign so far about your time as Health Secretary. But the truth is that you alienated the vast majority of NHS staff during that time. You were on my programme doing a phone-in the other day. You will remember Naomi the nurse, who is a Conservative, but said she could never vote for you to be Prime Minister. And there are a lot of other people in the NHS that feel like that. What do you say to them?
Well, as Prime Minister, you have to take very difficult decisions. And as Health Secretary, you have to take life and death decisions. And you saw in that video just now some of the patients who suffered terribly. The NHS, I'm so proud of it. It does a fantastic job, and doctors and nurses do an amazing job. They really do. But sometimes we get it wrong. And in order to put things right, I had to fight some very tough battles. And I hope people can see from that I'm a kind of Prime Minister who isn't going to make my biggest priority to court popularity. I'm going to do the right thing. And I do believe the NHS got safer on my watch. And I'm very proud of the changes that were made.
Are you at all uncomfortable about using some of those people in your campaign video?
Well, those people did an absolutely remarkable thing. You know, they lost mothers, children, sisters, brothers because of terrible things that went wrong in our health service. Now, what most people do when they have a terrible bereavement like that is they want to draw a line under it, close the chapter, move on with the rest of their lives. But they decided that they were going to relive those terrible tragedies, that terrible sadness, every single day because they wanted the NHS to improve. They're campaigners, and for me they were also kindred spirits because they stood beside me in some of those very difficult battles. And you know, we've got a long way to go in the NHS, but I look at some of the changes happening. I look at the changes happening at the old Mid-Staffs Hospital, now County Hospital. I look at great hospitals like UHB in the middle of Birmingham. I look at the transformation of, actually the one I'm most proud of is the transformation at Morecambe Bay, which is where James Titcombe lost his son. They had terrible problems in their maternity unit. They've now got one of the safest maternity units in the north, and I'm proud of that. And that's what those people are talking about in the video. They're proud of the changes that have been made.
Now, without mentioning the time you got the nationality of your wife wrong,
I think you've mentioned that, actually. I sort of alluded to it as well.
What's the biggest personal crisis you faced, and what lessons did you learn from it?
Probably for me, it was going through the Leveson inquiry in 2012. I had a 2-year-old child and a child that was just 3 months old. And I had the world's press camped outside my front door in Pimlico. I was being accused of something I hadn't done. I had helicopters pursuing me when I went from one part of London to another. And I found my inner steel when that happened. And I really learned to fight for what I believe. And I think that formed me. They say that if it doesn't break you, it makes you. And that's what happened to me.
Because you nearly lost your job then, didn't you?
I nearly lost my job. But, you know, do you know what I thought when that was going on? I thought, you know, thank God I didn't do this bloody thing I'm being accused of, because how miserable would I be right now if I had actually done it? And I hadn't, and I fought to clear my name, and I did.
If you're wondering why I keep tapping at my phone, it's not so I can see what Twitter's saying about this event. It's because I've got a stopwatch on it, and so I try to keep the time fair. Now, let's go to questions. If we could have the lights up, please. Heather Singleton. Where's Heather?
Good afternoon and welcome to Birmingham.
Where's Heather?
This question was for both of you. Are you looking to achieve a hard or soft Brexit? How will you get a rejected no deal through Parliament? How would you achieve a soft Brexit if the EU say a change in PM won't lead to any reopening of negotiations? Why would they listen to you?
Heather, can you just put your hand up? Because I can't...
She's up there.
There you are, Heather. Hello. Hi. Well, look, I am aiming heart and soul to get a deal because, you know, yesterday I was at an amazing company that manufactures steel wheels for off-road vehicles, and they've got about half the European market sewn up. Their margins, it employs about 350 people just outside Kidderminster. Their margins about 4%. A 10% tariff on their products would wipe them out. So there would be an economic impact of no deal. If that was the only way to deliver Brexit, then I'm afraid we have to do that, because that's what people have voted for, and we are a democracy first and foremost. But I would be aiming for a deal, and I believe I'm the candidate that's most likely to get a deal. If Parliament blocked a no-deal Brexit, I don't support that. I'm someone as a negotiator, a business person, I always want to be able to walk away from a deal. I want no deal to be left on the table. But I hope Parliament would see that I'm a Prime Minister sincerely committed to getting a deal, and therefore they would understand if I came back and said that hasn't been possible. How would I persuade the Europeans to change their mind? It's going to be tough, and I'm not going to sit here as someone who wants to be Prime Minister and say this is going to be easy. But talking to European leaders, I haven't met a single one who doesn't want to find a way through this. And they say, you know, if you come back with different ideas, a different approach, and you can demonstrate that it can get through Parliament, then they'll listen. And I think they would listen to a new British Prime Minister, and I think if we get this right, we can get the deal we need.
Why would they listen to you rather than Boris Johnson?
Well, I think it's for members of the Conservative Party to make that judgment, not for me.
No, but I think you... You clearly think that you're a better place to do that. I think we'd all like to know why.
Well, I've spent a long time, talking about my background, both inside government and outside government, and I think I've demonstrated that when it comes to negotiations, I can do difficult ones. I don't blink. I'm prepared to walk away. But, to answer the question, for businesses in the West Midlands, it will be patently 1,000 times better to get a deal. And that's why I think a responsible Prime Minister should aim for that.
But you see, some Brexiteers will say, well, it's okay, I hear what Jeremy Hunt says about, well, I would leave with no deal if it becomes patently clear that a deal is impossible to achieve. But they probably think at the last minute, given what you said about the dangers of the no deal on the economy, and you quoted, I think, in the BBC debate, an example of a farmer that you've met that would be affected. Could you, as a responsible Prime Minister, on the 31st of October, really say to the British people, yeah, I am going to take you out with no deal, and believe me, it's going to be an absolute disaster for you all. That's not what a responsible Prime Minister does, is it?
Look, if we got to the 31st of October, and the EU have not shown any willingness to negotiate a better deal that can get through the House of Commons, that's not going to trap us in the customs union, then my judgment is that weighing those difficult options up, the political risk of no Brexit is far worse than the economic risk of no deal. And I would take us out of the European Union in that situation. But it wouldn't be 100%, but it would not be my choice. If we can avoid it, if we can get a deal, that is something that a responsible Prime Minister should aim for.
Okay. A slightly allied question to this. Tom Huxley.
Hi. What changes would you seek to the withdrawal agreement?
Thank you, Tom. I think the main question, the main thing that stopped the House of Commons blocking the deal that we have at the moment is the backstop. And it's not the principle that we should have a soft border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. I think there's a very strong consensus in the House of Commons that it needs to remain a soft border with no border infrastructure. It is the fact that the agreement that we have at the moment commits us to remaining in the customs union effectively until the EU give us permission to leave. And that is not acceptable for Parliament. I don't think it's acceptable for the 52% who voted to leave the European Union. And that is the main thing that needs to change. I believe if you did that, we would be able to get a deal through the House of Commons. So that's what I focus on.
But how willing are they going to be to reopen the withdrawal agreement? Because they have made it abundantly clear, all of them. I mean, this is one thing I thought they would split at some point, but they haven't. They've remained united. And who is there to negotiate with now? Barnier's team has been disbanded. How could you possibly get them to reopen the withdrawal agreement?
Well, I'm sitting here saying this is not going to be easy, but it's not impossible either. And the reason I think there's a deal to be done is because it's in their interests as well as ours that we have an orderly Brexit. The damage, I mean, I've been to a flour processing plant in Holland.
You
which
get around.
I get around. I've been to quite a few places as Foreign Secretary, but, you know, there they bundle up flowers and then they ship them to Tesco and Waitrose and petrol stations up and down the country. Every single day, these flowers come in from all over the world, and their business would be absolutely decimated by tariffs. So there is a strong European interest to resolve this. If we go about it in a mature and sensible way, we have to come up with alternatives that demonstrate that we're not going to end up with border infrastructure on the island of Ireland. I believe we can do that. I think the answer will be to do with technology. And if we approach this the right way, as I say, I believe there is a deal to be done. I don't think it's going to be easy, but I think there's a deal.
Have you got the details of this in a document that on day one you can go to Brussels, well, maybe not on day one, but day two, go to Brussels and say, right, these are our ideas? Or are you going to be so busy doing all of this over the next 4 weeks that it's only really once you become Prime Minister that you can really set your head to it?
Well, I have not been directly responsible for the Brexit negotiations in the last year, but I've been a member of the Cabinet and I've been observing them, and I had a lot of time to think about what I think the right solutions are. So I have a clear idea of what the solution is. I don't think it's a particularly different solution to the solution that Boris is suggesting in terms of using technology. It's just the question is how we get there and who is the Prime Minister we trust to go to the European Union to persuade them that we need to find a different way to have an orderly Brexit.
So your basic pitch here is that, yes, I've got that plan, but also they're more likely to deal with me because they find me easier to deal with than maybe my opponent.
Well, my pitch is that I am a negotiator, a business person. I do think that they would engage with me, but I'm also someone who has a bottom line, knows not to blink, and knows, and this is the crucial thing in any negotiation, exactly what it is we need. What we need is something that allows us to leave the European Union but does not trap us in the customs union or the single market indefinitely so we can only leave them at the whim of the EU.
You say you know not to blink, but some people would say he's too nice. He's not going to be good in these negotiations because he will blink. How can you convince us that you wouldn't?
I think it's possible to be very polite and very tough. And I think my track record shows, you know, some very difficult industrial disputes that I had at the Department of Health, some very complex, the negotiations I had with the Treasury to get an extra £20 billion a year for the NHS. That was a big, big negotiation. And you know, I had a bottom line. I would have left the government if I hadn't been able to secure what I knew the NHS and NHS staff needed given the pressures of an ageing population. So I think the advantage of the politeness is that people will talk to you, but by golly, I hope they don't underestimate you because I'm going to get that deal.
I guarantee this next question will be the most popular with the audience. Nicholas Binney.
Nick Binney, Lichfield District Council.
Where are you? Oh, up there.
Following the latest evidence this week of left-wing bias by the BBC, what action will you take as Prime Minister to reform this public-funded organisation?
Well, I started at a disadvantage because I gave the BBC a licence fee settlement that did not slash their budgets and do all sorts of things that some people would have liked. Let me tell you what I won't do and what I will do. What I won't do is interfere with the BBC's editorial independence, because when I go around the world, people say that the most impressive thing about this country is that we are one of the most robust democracies on the planet, and they see that a state-funded broadcaster is holding politicians, whether government or opposition, to account. But what I will do is I will say to the BBC two things. I'll say to them, first of all, I expect you to cover how tough it is to set up a business just as much as how tough it is to live on benefits. Because if we're going to have a prosperous, successful society, you need to understand the the wealth creation that is the fundamental underpinning of all the social missions that we all believe in. And the second thing I'll say to the BBC is post-Brexit, I want you to have a role too. The BBC is a very trusted brand internationally. They could be a news broadcaster all over the world. They could be giving information to people who don't live in democracies about what's really happening. They could be the English language broadcaster of choice. I don't think we're anything like fulfilling that potential, and I would like them to reach for the stars and say, how could they be the world's news broadcaster? Because I think it'd be great for them, but great for Britain.
Do you think they are biased to the left?
I've experienced bias at times, and I've experienced other times when they're fair, but I think that they are themselves honest. Even people like Andrew Marr are honest. That I think the phrase he used is that there's an innate, on that occasion, there's an innate liberal bias, and that's why I think they need to redouble their efforts to understand how tough it is for people trying to get businesses off the ground, trying to create the wealth that pays for our public services.
Okay. Charlie Graver. Where's Charlie there?
As an 18-year-old looking to get a job in the next few years after university, how is your plan for Brexit and the economy going to ensure a strong graduate jobs market for young people?
Well, Charlie, thank you for asking that question. Let me say that my number one political priority is to get more people Charlie's age to support us, the Conservative Party, because, we, as the party of aspiration, we've created 1,000 jobs every single day since we've been in office in 2010. It's an extraordinary achievement. We don't get the credit for it, and too many of Charlie's friends don't understand that it's the Conservatives that create those opportunities for young people. It's Labour that destroys those opportunities. So how do we win over more young people? Well, yes, we've got the argument about aspiration, and another argument, by the way, is we need to make it much easier for people to buy a house. But people need to know that we're on their side when it comes to values. They need to know that we're going to do the right thing on climate change. But we also need to recognise that young people as a group have become politicised by Brexit. We used to say, well, young people may not vote Conservative, but they don't tend to vote. That has changed, and we need to look at their very specific concerns. And if you ask me one thing, when I'm on a doorstep in my constituency that I cannot justify, it's why the interest rate on student loans is 6%. That's not fair.
So what will you do about it?
Well, we've got to cut that interest rate. I think it should be cut either to inflation or to base rate. Let me say this, and this is a message that some people listening from home won't agree with. I think our tuition fee reforms were the right thing. They have made our universities some of the best funded universities in the world. But the fact is that nearly half of student debt is not paid back. And that says to me that there's something wrong in this system. And if you have these very, very high interest rates, which are essentially to subsidise the half of the debt that isn't paid back, then what happens is people's debt ratchets up. It even ratchets up when they're at university, when they can't do anything about it because they can't work or pay it back at that stage. And that risks discrediting a very good system. That's why I think it's a wrong we need to put right.
Charlie was talking about the graduate jobs market, but of course not everyone goes to university. Do you think a lot of youngsters have been let down over the last 10 or 15 years by them being encouraged to go to university when actually they would have been better off doing an apprenticeship or something else?
We can be incredibly proud of Michael Gove's education reforms, which I think have transformed state education. They made some of our state schools as good as the best private schools. Absolutely remarkable. But if we have a blind spot, it's not the 50% of school leavers who go to university, many of whom get, I think, one of the best educations in the world. It's the 50% who don't go to university. Nearly a quarter of primary school leavers don't reach the required standard for reading and writing. And, you know, that often doesn't get corrected at secondary school. They then end up without a rigorous qualification. If they get thrown out of their job because of driverless cars in 10 years' time, they won't be able to retrain if they can't read. Now, as Conservatives, we believe in opportunity for everyone. And that's why I said I want us to be the Conservative government that abolishes illiteracy and promises that every single young person will leave education with a rigorous qualification that means they can get a decently paid job.
Nobody's going to disagree with any of that, but it is a bit motherhood and apple pie, isn't it? Because
I
you
got
can
the
say, well,
policies
we
for
have
that.
this aspiration, but how are you actually going to get there?
Okay, well, we can talk policy. I won't give you a very long list, but one thing I would do is I would say that schools can't be good or outstanding in their Ofsted rating if they're not teaching all their children to read to the required level. I think it needs to be an absolute flaw when you have your inspection that you are doing what it takes to make sure people can read properly. Secondly, I would like to make sure we have the same rigour in the FE sector that we have in the schools sector. And I would say to the further education sector, there is more money on the table, but it's got to be a deal. We've got to know that what you're teaching people is so rigorous, so solid, that when people leave, they're going to be able to get a decently paid job. And what's a decently paid job? Well, for me, the average wage in this country is 27 grand. And I think everyone leaving our education system should have a qualification that means they can at least aspire to that.
Right, next question. Brian Tustain. Over there.
Brian Tustain, Warwickshire and Worcestershire area. Mr Hunt, violent knife and gun crimes are simply epidemic on the streets of Birmingham and towns across the West Midlands and indeed the country. What actions would you take as Prime Minister to eliminate this issue?
Well, I think Sajid Javid has made some very important proposals in this area. I think there's two things you have to do. First of all, you have to make sure, Brian, that we've got the right police numbers. And we had that period of austerity when we had that recession that was made so much worse by Labour. We had to make big cuts across the public services. And I think we probably brought down police numbers too much. And I think there was a delayed impact, and I think we're now feeling it. And the biggest way you stop knife crime is to make sure that the perpetrators know they're going to get caught. So that's the first thing.
So just to be specific on that, though, Sajid Javid said he would commit to 20,000 extra police officers to bring us back to where we were in 2010. Boris Johnson just now said something a little similar. Would you make a commitment on that?
I will make a commitment to extra police officers. I'm not going to make a commitment on the spot to an exact number, but I do think that there was a delayed impact. But I think there's something else, and it actually relates to the question that we talked about earlier, the causes of that knife crime. If those people left our education system with a decent qualification, as we've just been talking about, with hope that they can get on a ladder, they can get a decently paid job, then maybe they would choose a life different to the life of gangs on the street. So I think we need to tackle those causes as well.
Mitchell Burns-Jackson. Up the top there.
Due to the sharp rise in LGBT+ related hate crimes in the UK, how will you, as Prime Minister, not only protect members of the LGBT community, but also ensure that schools are not held to ransom over the teachings of same-sex relationships?
Where's... Up there. Mitchell, there you are. Well, thank you for asking that question. And we, I think, have shown the country that we are not the Conservative Party they like to think we are by the way we've championed LGBT plus rights and by the way that David Cameron brought in gay marriage. And I'm proud that we've done that as a party, and I think that shows our modern, compassionate, conservative approach. But we're not there yet. You're absolutely right. One of the tensions that we have to deal with is that in some schools, parents are reluctant for children to be taught about people's basic rights. And for me, my reason for my views on this was that when I was at school, on my very last day, one of my very best friends told me that he was gay. And he had kept it secret for the whole time that we'd been friends together. It was like he was burying a guilty secret. And he only felt he could tell me on the day that we were leaving that school and we may never see each other again. And that really made me think. And for me, being gay it's like being left-handed. It's something that you're born with. It's not something you choose. It's not something you can change. And that's why we have to recognize every child. Every child needs to understand that. And this is one of the great pieces of progress that we've made. And so we have to leave no stone unturned in making sure that every school, including faith schools, is making sure that we get the right messages across to our children.
And what about the issue that we all know about in Birmingham at the moment, where parents in a particular school, but this is not just only in Birmingham, object to their primary school-age children being taught about the fact that not everyone has a mother and a father? What do you do as a government about that?
Well, I'm afraid you just have to insist that the schools will teach what is right. And this is a country where we do not accept prejudice against people who are gay, and I'm afraid they have to understand that.
But the problem is that traditionally, Conservatives have always believed that parents know best how their children should be educated. And if the parents object to that, should they not have the right to say that their children shouldn't be taught those things?
Well, of course, as Conservatives, we always trust parents, and there's a tension here. But we also have to think about the rights of the children in those schools, including some children who themselves may be gay, and their need to understand that this is a society that is going to be completely colourblind. It's going to be completely blind to people's sexuality, and that is a great social advance that we've made, and we must defend it.
So, you have young children. Presumably, therefore, you're happy for them to be taught about same-sex relationships in primary school.
Absolutely. And I remember taking going to pick up my son from a birthday party, and I said, just take me to the mummy and the daddy so I can thank them for the party. And he said, oh no, she hasn't got a mummy and a daddy, she's got two mummies. And he was completely relaxed about it, didn't think it was remotely surprising or unusual, and that is a happy family. And we as Conservatives are the party of the family, and I'm just so proud that we've become a party that understands that families can be different, they can have different shapes and sizes, they can still be happy, solid, strong families.
I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right. Michael Series? Over that.
Good afternoon, Jeremy, and well pronounced, Ian. Thank you. We're in Birmingham this afternoon, and we've got the HS2 station probably just over a mile down the road. If you're the next leader of this party, and of course the next Prime Minister, will you continue with HS2? If you will, why will you continue with it? And if not, what would you prioritise instead of HS2?
Michael, I'm going to answer that question very directly, and I know there'll be some people in this room who won't agree with what I'm going to say, and there'll be some people at home, Conservative Party members, who won't agree with it either. But I will proceed with HS2. It is absolutely vital for our country. And there are two reasons why. First of all, at the point of Brexit, the world is looking at us. They're saying, what sort of economy are you going to be? Are you going to be an economy that still can't do big infrastructure projects, even though in Japan they had their first high-speed rail in 1964, 2 years before I was born? We need proper transport infrastructure in this country if we're going to be the most high-tech, modern, fastest-growing economy in Europe. And the second reason is, as Conservatives, we can't just be the party of prosperity in London and the South East. We have to be the party that spreads prosperity to the whole country. And that's why it's not just HS2 for me, it's the third runway, it's Northern Powerhouse Rail, it's fibre to the home across the whole country. All these things that will spread that prosperity to every corner of our great country.
Would you like to speed up the development of the second and third stages of HS2?
Well, you've squeezed a few spending commitments out of me this afternoon, Ian, so I think I'll leave it at that for now. But let's deliver HS2. I mean, this is a huge project, and then when we've delivered that, we can look at what next.
Jeremy, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you.